They're in your hand. You have to get them out, Lizzie. Lizzie, you have to...
Welcome to Hamburgers and Horror, the home of meat, monsters, and music appreciation. I'm Noah Hook, and today we're looking at The Perfection. This 2018 psychological horror is hard to sum up quickly without spoiling its many twists, but it follows a once promising cellist named Charlotte. She meets up with her former teacher's newest star Lizzie, and let's just say things unravel from there as the secrets within the women and their prestigious music school slowly come to light. The Perfection was directed, co-written, and produced by Richard Shepard, who has brought us films like Oxygen, The Hunting Party, and Dom Hemingway. He co-wrote the screenplay with writing duo Eric Charmello and Nicole Snyder, who have collaborated on Supernatural and Ringer. The film stars Allison Williams from Horizon Line and Get Out as Charlotte, Logan Browning from Dear White People and Brotherly Love as Lizzie, and Steven Weber from Jeffrey and the miniseries version of The Shining. Cinematography was handled by Vanja Cernjul from Crazy Rich Asians and Marco Polo, and the score was composed by Paul Haslinger from Prom Night and Death Race. The Perfection premiered at Fantastic Fest and it was quickly picked up by Netflix. It was met with pretty solid reviews from critics, and with a 71 and 57% on Rotten Tomatoes, it seems general audiences weren't quite as keen on The Perfection. Thank you to my patron Horror Movie Syllabus for requesting The Perfection for me to review. I think this is going to be a very interesting one to discuss. I watched it myself for the first time back in 2019, and boy, I was surprised. Let me just say The Perfection has a few very big twists, so if you don't want to be spoiled, I'd probably recommend going to see it on your own first. But I also feel the need to give a pretty big spoiler warning and trigger warning before I really recommend it to anybody. While it isn't evident early on in the film, the story deals directly with rape and pedophilia. I will be getting into that subject matter later in the breakdown, so if you're not feeling up to that right now, it may be a good time to stop the video. But there is a ton of interesting stuff to discuss within The Perfection, so it's probably time we get started. I hope y'all like vomit bugs, cause we're watching The Perfection. The movie opens on a dead lady, who we quickly learn is Charlotte's mom. Her aunts discuss how Charlotte took care of her for nearly a decade, and they wonder if she is able to play the cello the way she once was. She recalls leaving the prestigious Back-Off Academy, where she passed a new student named Elizabeth. We start chapter 1, where we overhear a voicemail Charlotte leaves Anton and Paloma, the heads of the academy. She tells them her mother has finally died, so she wants to rejoin them at Back-Off. This brings her to Shanghai, where the now critically acclaimed Elizabeth is all over the billboards. Damn, Charlotte, take a picture, it'll last longer. She is greeted by Anton and Paloma at the concert, and she embraces them with her scarred wrists. Back-Off is showcasing their most talented recruits from China this evening, and we learn that Anton's grandfather started the academy back in 1927. It is the premier school for young cellists in the world, and while they teach hundreds of students in Boston, only a select few are chosen to live at the academy. These 3 students are competing for that honor, which includes a 4-year scholarship to join them in America. Their latest prized student, Elizabeth, is here to judge the 3. Anton then reveals that Charlotte is in attendance as well, and despite her 10-year absence, she is still a well-known pupil of Back-Off. Charlotte recalls suicide attempts and electroshock therapy, and we learn Charlotte will also be a judge this evening. She meets with her old teachers, Theus and Jeffrey, and Anton introduces her to Elizabeth. She prefers Lizzie, and the two start gawking at how talented they are. Charlotte has followed her entire career since leaving Back-Off, and Lizzie shares that she idolized her as a young student. The life-changing cello concert begins, and the two quickly agree that girl number 1 is the obvious winner. Lizzie points their attention to the parents, where she shares that a mother and father have started an affair with each other. They watch the parents cheat on their spouses as their kids compete against each other, and that's the kind of shit that gets Lizzie going. Later that night, Charlotte notices a music note tattooed on Lizzie's back, and the latter shares how excited she was the first time she saw her. She asks Charlotte if she still plays, who shares that after years of nothing, she began playing for herself again recently. Lizzie says she could never imagine leaving Backoff as she views them as her family now. Charlotte says she doesn't miss the grueling hours and strict expectations to be perfect, and Lizzie shares she is going on a short vacation to get some rest. They are heading inside when they watch a man's nose bleed before he throws up, and some locals share that there is a bad fever that has been spreading in southern China. Lizzie was just scouting in that area, and they discuss how Anton likes to find talent in the most remote locations. Lizzie asks Charlotte to go dancing with her, to which she says yes, and Lizzie is beckoned back to the auditorium. Anton asks her to play a piece, and she only agrees on the condition that Charlotte play alongside her. She argues that she no longer plays at the professional level, but Lizzie refuses to believe she still isn't a master. They begin cello duet number 3, and as they absolutely kill it, we watch as they later make out, go dancing, and finally have some sexy time to cap off the evening. Lizzie is shocked to learn that Charlotte had never had sex before, which was put on hold just like everything else when her mom got sick. Lizzie invites her to join her vacation travel, warning her that it will involve lots of buses and rural towns. Charlotte says yes, and as they have a celebratory toast, we see that she has the same music note on her shoulder. We enter chapter 2 the next morning, and Charlotte gets Lizzie some ibuprofen for her hangover. She also advises some hair of the dog. Lizzie is feeling like shit, but is determined to get her vacation started today, but Charlotte convinces her to at least eat breakfast before they go. That does not help, and Charlotte notices a bug crawling on her as they hop aboard their worse-for-wear travel bus. Lizzie feels like there is a fire in her head and starts guzzling water and more ibuprofens. They begin their journey to more rural lands, and Charlotte listens to rap as she plays peekaboo with a child. This is interrupted when Lizzie says she needs to drop a deuce, and she asks her to stop the bus. Her English is promptly ignored by the bus driver, but a good Samaritan steps in and translates for her. Lizzie stands up and vomits, warning that she is about to shit herself, and the reluctant driver finally pulls over. Lizzie barely makes it off the bus in time, and she starts panicking as more vomit emerges. A nice lady provides Charlotte some rags to clean her up, and she yells at the clearly unhappy driver and his jug of disinfectant. They hop back on and Lizzie masks up, and Charlotte learns it'll be a while before they are anywhere near a hospital. Of course, there isn't any cell signal, and Lizzie's headache is getting worse. Her cries really start concerning the passengers, and just when she starts calming down, she has to puke again. She heaves all over the bus window, and Charlotte is shocked to see maggots crawling around in it. Lizzie worries she caught the disease spreading in the south, and she screams about her fear of dying and infecting Charlotte. She starts scratching at her arms, believing the maggots are crawling around inside her, including deep inside her head. The driver has finally had enough and says they have to get off the bus, and as Charlotte argues with him, Lizzie starts bashing her head against the window. The driver finally drags them out, but the Good Samaritan tells Charlotte they aren't too far from a small town. The driver yeets himself out of this shit show, and the ladies find themselves all alone. Itchy Lizzie tells Charlotte to leave her, insisting that she is going to die out here. Her arms start wriggling with bugs under her skin until they burst out, and she fucking throws up spiders. Charlotte says they have to get them out of her hand, and she whips out a cleaver. Lizzie immediately grabs it and chops off her hand, and we suddenly rewind all the way back to that morning in the hotel. Now we're gonna get some insight into what the fuck just happened. Turns out those weren't ibuprofens, they were Charlotte's mom's medicine, which has a laundry list of side effects. The effects are increased by alcohol, and Charlotte snagged that cleaver from the restaurant they ate at later. The bug she claimed to see was the beginning of planting this infestation idea in her head, and of course she downed more of those hallucinogenic pills on board. Damn, she even researched tourniquets on the bus while Lizzie slept, and she had a signal when claiming not to. There were no bugs in the vomit or in her arm, but the mere suggestion was enough to cause Lizzie to see it. We hop over to Boston 3 weeks later, and we finally get a look at Backoff Academy as we hop into chapter 3. Paloma is giving a tour to Zhang Li, the winner of the competition, and her mother. They get to see the chapel, which is only for the most gifted students, which was designed to have the perfect acoustics. It takes years to achieve the ability they desire to play here, but Anton believes one day she will be able to join the ranks of Charlotte and Lizzie. Zhang Li says goodbye to her sweet mother, and that night Anton is shocked to find the still missing Lizzie at his gate. And he is not happy to see she is missing a hand. She explains what happened in China, but since she was the one who took the pills and did the chopping, apparently the police couldn't help her. Charlotte was long gone by the time Lizzie was hospitalized, and she says that Charlotte was morbidly jealous of the talent, fame, and adoration she had. She tracked her down all the way to China, seduced her, drugged her, and passively mutilated her because she had the life she wanted. Lizzie thinks back to her fateful chop, and as she watches Anton and the students, he asks her for a quick chat. They are moving Lizzie out of the academy as she no longer has a purpose here. They will pay for her new apartment and her rehabilitation, but she begs them to let her teach or even scrub the toilets. She starts pulling on Anton's heartstrings for mercy, but Paloma steps in and reminds her this is a conservatory, not a hospital. Anton says she was blessed with an incredible gift, but now it is gone and she needs to go. Lizzie sadly looks over the history of Back Off until she reaches a photo of Charlotte, which she punches before circling into revenge mode. We hop to Charlotte's home in Minneapolis, and she hears some strange noises outside while chopping tomatoes. She hears a door creak open, and who would have guessed it's Lizzie with a taser. She kicks the crap out of Charlotte before we meet up with Anton and Paloma, and looks like Lizzie has brought them a gift in the trunk of her car. Charlotte wakes up in Back Off and tells Anton that Lizzie is insane, but he argues that she isn't much better. She says she did that to Lizzie to help her, and this is where the movie takes a sharp turn. Charlotte knows exactly what Lizzie had to do in order to attain her status here at Back Off, and that she was just as brainwashed as she was before her mom got sick. Charlotte spent a decade mentally declining as her mother died, and after several suicide attempts, she was sent to some kind of psychiatric institute. She eventually saw the light and decided to return, hoping that she could save Lizzie from him. Anton stammers before getting serious, and we flash back to her time in the chapel. She makes a mistake during a rehearsal, and Anton begins shaming her as she begs for forgiveness. She knows what happens when mistakes are made here, and Theus and Jeffrey emerge from another room and sit down. The academy has been in his family for generations, and he intends on teaching students the same way he and the other instructors were taught. The very best is expected of them, and she was branded with that tattoo to signify being ready to achieve it. Failure discredits the academy and all of their hard work, and as Anton has her repeat more culty indoctrination stuff, Charlotte dreams of escape. Anton says failure keeps us from being close to God, leaving our talent to lay in waste. And what happens when one of the chosen ones fail? Well, as Anton puts it, they pay the price. Jump to adult Charlotte bound and gagged, and while she makes a valiant escape effort, she is eventually knocked out. She awakens dressed up in the chapel where she is chained to the floor. He tells her it is time to play here again, and he calls out Theus, Jeffrey, and Paloma to join the festivities. They all adored when Charlotte would achieve the perfection, and he argues that her punishments in here are what helped her achieve it. She and the others were not abused children, but students achieving greatness. Lizzie agrees that the talent imbued into her at Back Off was a gift, and she begins preparing the ceremonial whiskey. Anton says if she achieves the perfection, she can go home, but if she makes a mistake, it won't be her that pays the price. They bring in Zhang Li, who has no idea what kind of danger she is in. Charlotte begs him to do it to her and not to Zhang Li, but he says it is time for her to play. Charlotte begins and does a perfect job for a while, but as expected, she eventually makes a mistake. Somewhat luckily, Anton sends Zhang Li to bed and mocks Charlotte for believing she would pay for her mistake. She still needs years of training before she could be invited to play here as a vessel of God. He tells Theus and Jeffrey to fetch him when she stops biting, and we jump to Charlotte being bound by her arms as well. The chair swivels back, but as Theus and Jeffrey undress, Lizzie says she has earned first dibs. She, well, prepares to rape Charlotte with her nub, but then Theus and Jeffrey start getting woozy. The nasty monsters start convulsing and straight up die, and surprise, the women are working together. We rewind back to Lizzie's home invasion, where she admits to Charlotte that she was right. Back in China, Charlotte explained her reasoning, citing how brainwashed she was. Lizzie wouldn't see the truth on her own, so to save her she would need Anton to have zero interest in keeping her around. They taught these girls that this rape and torture was education and higher calling, but Anton does not love or care for his students, and he will not help her in her time of need. She promises to be there though, and now we've come full circle. Lizzie can now see the years of abuse she suffered for what they were, and she asks Charlotte for help in stopping them. And that brings us to Chapter 4! Paloma walks into Anton's office and pisses herself, and the ladies walk in as the classical music switches to rap. Lizzie tips over the stabbed woman and whips out the cleaver, and tells Anton that Charlotte opened her eyes. Charlotte reveals she actually has a buzz cut, I guess meaning she's only been out for a few months. I'm not really sure what that adds to anything. Anton starts saying he is sick but will seek out help, and we experience the women attacking him from a long close-up of Charlotte's face. She imagines her dreamed escape as she joins Lizzie in attacking, and she remembers her abuse as she is knocked to the floor. She tries to stop Anton from grabbing a knife, but he overpowers her and stabs her through the arm. Lizzie manages to knock him down with a fire poker, and she beats him for every disgusting thing he has ever done. Charlotte passes out while imagining her childhood self, and we jump to some time in the future. Now both Lizzie and Charlotte are amputees, as well as Anton, who has had his arms, legs, and eyes removed. But thank goodness he can still hear as the ladies work together to achieve the perfection. And that's the perfection. This is an odd one. I have a lot of mixed feelings. I'll start with some of my positive takeaways. While I will pick certain aspects apart soon, I always appreciate when a movie takes a chance and goes for a non-linear story. They always just cause the viewer to ask questions in a way that a regular, straight-cut linear story wouldn't. Cernjul clearly gets creative with the cinematography, and for the most part, I enjoy the weird camera angles, dolly shots, and vibrant lighting. Most people seem to agree that the first act is the strongest, and I'm definitely in that party. It builds up the mystery pretty well, and the tension slowly starts to boil over. That all comes to a head with Charlotte unveiling the cleaver, and from there the movie makes a frequent amount of mood changes and plot twists. The final act, and especially the final scene, seems to be where it loses the most people, and I get it. The final act is tonally disjointed in a way that just doesn't work for me. The acting that was pretty serious this whole time switches over to straight up cheese with really cringy dialogue, and it fumbles what could have been a really impactful ending. Allison Williams and Logan Browning both mostly give fantastic performances, and Steven Weber really sells how corrupt and demented Anton is. But that brings me to the crux of what this movie is, and that's where I start to have some issues. The Perfection is a rape revenge movie, and it is certainly one of the most unique that I've seen. It belongs to an exploitation subgenre that traces back to at least the 60s with The Virgin Spring, but it has synthesized with horror to create films like The Last House on the Left, I Spit on Your Grave, and Miss 45. The entire subgenre is a complicated matter that I could do a whole video on, but I'm building up to two big points here. The first is that The Perfection is one of a handful of newer takes on this divisive genre that flips the script by focusing more on the victims than the attacker. A few recent examples include MFA, Promising Young Woman, and the aptly named Revenge. Historically in this genre, the sexual assault usually takes place in the first act, we watch the trauma take its effect in the second act, and we follow either the victim or her family in the third act as they seek revenge. These newer films more often than not deviate from this path in some way. The Perfection doesn't reveal this twist until the third act, and it really scrambles the typical 3-act structure these films typically follow. And my second point bounces off of that one. Typically in this subgenre, you know what you're getting into pretty early on, whereas with The Perfection, it is a complete surprise upon the first viewing. The Perfection utilizes child rape as a twist, and something about that just doesn't sit right with me. I can't quite put my finger on where it goes wrong, but for me, the film just doesn't take its very dark subject matter quite serious enough. It just has too much camp and absurdity in the final act for me to take any kind of genuine message from it. I also don't love that the movie really hones in on amputation. I understand for Lizzie and Charlotte it represents the permanent impact and trauma they've experienced, but it still feels a bit exploitative here to me. There are just certain shots where they show off Lizzie's stump and it just feels like they're fetishizing and trivializing it. Obviously, there have been countless body parts removed in the horror genre, but the horror of it is usually focused on the removal and then usually the quick death that follows. Here we focus more on the aftermath, which could have been interesting, but we don't do it with any realistic depth, and the amputation is mostly used as a learning method. Lizzie thanks Charlotte for chopping her hand off, and we are expected to believe there is any scenario in which that's a realistic outcome. And that kind of leads into my most consistent issue, which is that The Perfection is just wildly far-fetched. Charlotte's plan to save Lizzie is just so absurd. Walk through how many steps she had to go through to enact this. Like, Charlotte could have just walked into back off and shot the professors. Was it really necessary to chop off a victim's hand? With the teachers gone, I feel like Lizzie would have eventually come to terms with what happened to her while keeping her hand, but no, I guess it had to happen on Charlotte's terms. And I understand that Charlotte was in a mental institution or whatever, so maybe her reasoning was a bit demented, but that itself felt like another cheap throwaway as well. I haven't even touched on whether or not I think this has a successful feminist message. On Facebook and YouTube comments, I've seen it described as perfection and as a complete misogynistic misfire. I think this is one of those films where the beauty is really in the eye of the beholder, where we all take something slightly different away from it. I think the overall theme is fairly successful, but I really think it could have stuck the landing better. All in all, The Perfection has a big bag of tricks it wants to show off, but the embellishment can't quite distract from the convoluted plot at its core. It constantly changes from thriller to mystery to revenge flick, and while I'm sure a lot of people love the range, for me it doesn't become more than the sum of its parts by the end. As I said in the beginning, this is a film worth checking out. The performances are really good and the technical aspects are top notch, and I've seen plenty of people that really adore this movie and its twists. I will certainly revisit The Perfection at some point to see if my thoughts change, but I don't really expect them to. Once again, thank you to my patron Horror Movie Syllabus for requesting The Perfection for me to review. I'm not sure if he'll agree with me or not about this movie, but y'all should definitely go check out his video about revenge films. There are a few he included that I still haven't seen, so if you like this subgenre, he may provide you with some hidden gems. Well, I think that's about it. Join me in 2 weeks as we check out a proper summer camp slasher with The Burning. Thank you all for joining me, and an extra thank you to my patrons. As always, I'm Noah Hook, and thanks for watching Hamburgers and Horror. Stay safe out there. Thanks for watching my review of The Perfection. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe so you can keep up with all my horror reviews. And if you want to help support the channel further, you should check out my Patreon account. You'll be able to vote for future movies and franchises that I cover on the channel. Thanks y'all.